Pretty much every year we are treated to at least one new film from the Walt Disney Animation Studios. This year, of course, we're actually going to get 2 whole new animated features from Disney. Later this year, we're gonna get the magical musical Encanto, and just this month, we finally got to see Raya and the Last Dragon. But Raya was actually not supposed to have come out in 2021. It was supposed to have come out back in November of 2020, but due to the circumstances, it was pushed back to 2021. But in a different timeline, things might have looked very different. In fact, originally, we were supposed to have gotten a completely different film. Hello, my name is Martin, and let me tell you the story of Disney's Gigantic. Now, to tell this story, we have to go back, all the way back to 1947 and the 9th film in the official Disney animated canon. Yes, this all starts with a film called Fun and Fancy Free. Fun and Fancy Free was one of Disney's so-called package films, which means that it actually consists of 2 separate short films loosely tied together by a narrative of Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio, just sort of jumping around and stumbling across these stories. These package films were made around the time of the Second World War. Back then, Disney couldn't afford the long production times that it took to make a feature-length animated film. So in order to save on cost, they made these packages of shorts that would make up the runtime of a regular feature, but were way cheaper to make. And though none of them were sort of smash hits for the studio, it did mean that Disney could stay afloat during the war times. It's kind of hard to imagine today that there was ever a time where Disney was struggling for money. But back to the movie. Like I said, Fun and Fancy Free consists of 2 different stories. The first one is a story about Bongo the circus bear who falls in love with a girl bear and has to fight for her love against the biggest and meanest bear in the forest. It's a cute story, but honestly, even though it's a short, it could have been tightened up a bit. I personally found it a bit long-winded. But anyways, the second story in the film is Mickey and the Beanstalk. This is obviously an adaptation of the classic fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk, with Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck and Goofy as the main characters. And fun fact, this is actually the last time Walt Disney himself voiced Mickey Mouse. Mickey and the Beanstalk is a funny story, and obviously these 3 characters are always great. But it's also a fairly simple story. Mickey, Donald and Goofy are 3 farmers living in a happy little valley called, well, Happy Valley. And Happy Valley is wonderful. The babbling brook, the trees and fields, life is prosperous, and it's all thanks to a magical singing harp. But this all changes when one day the golden harp is stolen. The brook dries out, the plants wither away, and the whole valley is thrown into poverty. Things are looking very grim for the trio, so as a last resort, Mickey decides to sell their beloved cow for a couple of magic beans. Goofy and especially Donald are naturally pretty mad that Mickey apparently got swindled into selling their cow for a few beans, and Donald tosses the beans away. But during the night, it turns out that it actually is magic beans. And as the beanstalk grows, Mickey, Donald and Goofy are lifted high into the skies. When they wake up the next morning, they find that they've arrived at a huge castle in the clouds, inhabited by a jolly old giant. I actually think that Willy, as the giant is called, is a pretty great character. He's definitely not the smartest guy, but he still manages to be intimidating when he's chasing Mickey and the gang. And it turns out that the giant was actually the one who stole the magic singing harp from the valley because he wanted it to sing him to sleep. And I mean, when you have dragonflies in your garden that literally sound like bomber planes, I think everyone might need a bit of music to drown out the noise when you want to sleep. But Mickey and the gang obviously need to take the harp back with them, so they wait until the giant is sleeping and then they try to sneak off with the harp. But just as they think they've gotten away with it, Willy wakes back up and sets after them. They hurry down the beanstalk and cut it down, sending the giant tumbling through the air and crashing down. And that is pretty much the end. It really is just one of those old 5 to 10 minute Disney shorts, and the fairy tale of Jack and the Beanstalk works great for that format. But someone at Disney apparently thought that they could do better. So 68 years later, at Disney's biannual fan club convention, the D23 Expo, the company announced a new film based on the fairy tale. And following the trend of naming Disney films with just a single adjective, the film was naturally going to be called Gigantic. This time it wasn't just going to be a small segment of a package film. This time they were really gonna go in depth with the story. And the film's director, Nathan Greeno, even went as far as to say that they were hoping that this would be the definitive version of Jack and the Beanstalk. Now, given that this film never came out, you might think that they probably scrapped it pretty soon after the announcement and that they probably hadn't come too far with the production. But that's not actually the case. When they announced the film, they were already in production. The songwriters from Frozen, Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, who were also supposed to do the songs for Gigantic, even performed one of the songs from the movie as part of the announcement. Gigantic was obviously supposed to be the next big fairy tale film from Disney, and if you want to imagine it, I think it would have probably had sort of the same vibe as Tangled. The movie was set to be set in Spain during the Age of Exploration, which is a time period between roughly the 15th century and the 18th century. Between the 15th and the 18th century. Basically, it's the same sort of time period as Pocahontas or DreamWorks' The Road to El Dorado. And I honestly think that sounds like a really fun idea. I think it's really interesting to think that when everyone else is sailing out onto the oceans to discover new lands, Jack is searching upwards. While Columbus is discovering America, Jack is discovering the world of the giants. And I think it's when Jack gets to the giant realm in the skies that this movie was really going to become its own. Because unlike the original fairy tale and Mickey and the Beanstalk, the giant he encounters isn't a fully grown man, but instead, it's a little girl named Inma. And I mean, I say a little girl, but of course, while Inma is only 11 years old, she would still be around like 18 meters tall, which is roughly like 60 foot. And I feel like an 11-year-old is already kind of a handful, let alone a 60-foot tall one. Now, what was going to happen after Jack encountered Inma is a bit more of a mystery. As far as I could gather, Jack pretends to be a doll for a while, which leads me to think that he might have had a sort of Toy Story situation going on for a while there. But at some point, he would have revealed, at least to Inma, that he was a real human. But Inma wasn't going to be the only giant in the film. No, the giant's realm in this film was going to be significantly bigger than in Mickey and the Beanstalk. I mean, not that the individual things would necessarily be bigger, but there was going to be a lot more giants. And the real antagonists of the film were going to be a group of storm giants that were going to be more than 36 meters tall or 120 foot. But of course the movie was never released and all we have left of it are a few pieces of concept art. But how far along production was the movie actually? Is there just an almost finished film lying around somewhere in a vault at the Walt Disney Animation Studios? Well, the thing is, when Disney are working on a big animated feature like this, they are constantly tweaking and changing things in the story throughout the whole production. They started with a story or a script, but as they start drawing storyboards and writing songs, they might realize that something is off, or they might just want to take it in a different direction. You might have heard the story that originally in Frozen, Elsa was supposed to be the bad guy. Elsa was evil, and there are even some deleted scenes from this version of the film that you can see on the Blu-ray. But when the filmmakers heard the song Let It Go, which they obviously loved, they realized that the song was way too upbeat and hopeful for a villain. So they actually changed the story of the film so that Elsa wasn't the villain anymore. But apparently whatever it was that didn't work in Gigantic couldn't be fixed with a song. They first pushed back the film from its original release date in 2018 to 2020, and then later on they eventually cancelled the film altogether. So yeah, that is the tragic story of the failure of Disney's Gigantic. I personally think that the concept and the idea of the film sounds really exciting, and I would have loved to see the film. But on the other hand, if the movie really didn't work, it's probably for the best that they ended up cancelling it. I do really think that Disney tried to make the movie work though, and they definitely thought it was going to happen. There's even a reference to the film in Zootopia on one of Duke Weaselton's bootleg DVDs. That's how much they thought they could make this movie work. But alas, for now the movie has been put on ice. Now of course, you should never say never. Disney might decide to come back to the story and concept at some point in the future. I mean, they wanted to make an adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen for decades before they finally made Frozen, so who knows? Until then, we can only speculate on what the film might have been. But tell me, would you have liked to see Disney's Gigantic, or do you think it's probably for the best that they cancelled it? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, remember to hit that like button if you like this video, and if you want more videos from me, feel free to subscribe to the channel. But with that said, that's pretty much all I had for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care and so long.